Hey guys, this is James from TeaDB bringing you InBetweenIsode number 99. So thank you guys for tuning in. Today is going to be another slightly different episode, running it solo again. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about some experimentation I've been doing. I want to add a disclaimer that says I'm by no means an expert, just a guy experimenting that wanted to share the results. And it's specifically the brewing of how I have been approaching older ripes, raws, in this case, Heicha, which I guess ripes and raws would also fall into. But this week it's a Liubao, an old Liubao from the 90s. This is a fairly run-of-the-mill tea. I got it from Fine Pu'er, who sent me a sample. It's 1990s Duoteli, which is one of the Liubao producers in Guangxi, which is the area they produce Liubao. I found it's a fairly run-of-the-mill tea, but I wanted to sort of show how I've been doing it. So I start out fairly similarly. I use a ratio of about 5 grams for 75 milliliters, which is approximately what this Shibo is. So I preheat the vessel. I find that's especially necessary, especially good to do for these older teas that can take a lot. Take a quick smell, and then depending on how much I trust the cleanliness, I will rinse once or twice. Just because I want to get to the content a little bit faster, I'm going to rinse this guy twice. This tea, I've seen that Liubao tends to have smallish leaves. I think it is the small varietal, unlike most of Pu'er. This one has a little bit more thick, robust leaves than some of the other productions I've seen. So sweet, earthy, chocolate. These would be very familiar notes for people that like darker sorts of Pu'er, ripes, older raws, etc. Okay, so still fairly run-of-the-mill so far. And so for the first steep, I usually just give it a normal brew as well. And I found that this method especially worked really well for some of the old Essence of Tea, the old Liubao sold on Essence of Tea supposedly from the 70s and the 60s. Okay, so brewing up a nice red liqueur. And once more. Yep, so it's brewing up, still a fairly red liqueur. Liubao is not, this Liubao at least, it's not compressed in the same way that Pu'er is, so we'd expect it to maybe get going a little bit faster, especially if you're someone that likes to brew larger chunks of Pu'er. And even if you break it up some, it's still going to come out a little bit slower. Cheers, guys. Not very sweet, fairly robust. Let's see, I'm gonna wait for this to cool down just a little bit. But I'm getting some sort of chocolatey notes off of this. I would say that this tea is somewhat oily. It's not heavy oil as a few of the better Liubaos or Pu'ers can tend to get, but it has some of that characteristic, but I feel like, at least for this steep, it's not fully there. Yeah, I'm getting some chocolate. It's fairly front focused in the mouth. I don't currently notice a lot of effects going on at the back of the mouth or in the throat or anything. Okay, and so with a lot of these teas, you really do want to hit it with heavy temperatures. Probably if I was going at my own parameters, I would go maybe one more steep with this, but because we want to just sort of illustrate this method, I'm going to reheat that. So steep number 2. It has a little bit more of an engaging texture, little bit of that sort of silkiness that you can sometimes get with some buddy teas, buddy raw pours, or a lot of ripe pours. I think those would also tend to be buddy, or black teas maybe. Body is thickened, I would say, when in the previous steep is maybe like slightly oily. It's more moderately oily now. Okay, so now we will, for now I've just started to really push these teas a little bit earlier. And so I'm going to let that go for, maybe 20 seconds, maybe even a little bit longer. And I find that a lot of these teas have been really nicely mellowed, and so a lot of the bite and stuff is reduced. So what pushing it can do is it really brings out, it works really well for the best of the teas in the sense that it brings out a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on. So if there are off flavors, those will come out as well. So for lesser teas, it may not work as well. Or if you start pushing too early, like let's say I just did it on the initial steep, some of that storage, that little funk might have got into it. So you could also see that's a much darker brew. It looks pitch black in my cup. So fairly standard earthy tones in there, not incredibly complex. Again, I want to say that this tea is not anything super special. It's a free sample that you can get on Fine Pu'er if you order. It's been lying around forever, but this method really does help to bring out everything, and really helps to see what's good about the tea as well as what is bad about the tea. Cheers, guys. I'm going to wait for a second. Still quite hot. And so I'm waiting on my 4th brew because I want to see how this brew is before I start to brew. Sometimes, like for the flash steeps, I kind of know about how long I'm going to steep it for, or maybe I just want to speed up the process, so I will do those consecutively. So as it cools down a little bit more chocolatey tones to that. So very thick, still very, very much front focused. There's not a ton of depth that I'm getting from this that's going to throat or anything, but let's see how this goes. Sometimes some of those sweetnesses can come back, some huigan to throat. Definitely creamier vanilla notes coming off of this. Maybe a little bit of nuttiness. Strong, much more strong, a powerful effect on the mouth. I'm not noticing a ton that's off about the tea. It's not extremely pleasant. I can feel my body warming up as well. So I'm gonna keep that going for maybe even a touch longer than the previous steeping. Maybe hints of some fruits. One thing that this tea this method will tend to do is it will tend to brew out your teas quicker for very obvious reasons, just because you are pushing it. So you're going to get a fewer but more concentrated, and in the case of good tea, tastier steeps. And one way to judge quickly is just to sort of like know, if especially useful in like gaiwans and stuff like that, if you can judge by the liqueur. Another way is sort of with your nose, smelling where the tea is. And we'll keep that going. This is probably about 30 seconds or so. You could probably have gone a little bit longer. It's not brewing a pitch black in the chahai. Some grainier, maltier notes coming out. So, really blackish red, reddish black. In the cup, it looks a lot closer to pitch black. And so, on the negative side, a few of the teas that have been maybe a little bit funkier stored, or maybe are just worse material, will taste completely nasty with this method, where maybe you could brew around those negative aspects with shorter steep times, or in the case of young raw pu'er, brewing at a lower temperature to reduce some of that bite. This method does not do that at all. If you guys remember way back a couple of years ago, we brought on some really nice high mountain Gaoshan from Tony at Origin Tea, and that we pushed to ridiculous lengths, and I was surprised at how good that tasted. So we are drinking steep number 4. Could probably only push this tea, if you want to keep the steep times reasonable, a couple more times. I'll probably call it quits after this. This tea is nice. But there are other things to drink as well. Cheers, guys. Really oily. So notes of like vaguely sweet, I want to say like grain and caramel. Yeah, chocolatey notes continuing to come out. And yeah, I definitely have enjoyed this session. I will probably dump these leaves after this, but definitely something to experiment with if you have like a favorite go-to older ripe, older raw, older heicha, or even younger stuff. Try it out with this method, see how it compares with your normal brewing method. Especially for high quality teas, I think you might get a lot of enjoyment, and you're drinking a little bit less liquid, so maybe you go to the bathroom a little bit less. So thank you guys for tuning in. Let me know how you guys like this episode, and cheers.